看看新闻网。
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Money Talks. I'm your host, David Symington. China has already more retired persons than any other country in the world, and that figure will more than double in the next 30 years. Who's going to pay all the retirement bills? There doesn't seem to be anybody who knows, though a lot of people are working on the answer, trying to save China's pension system. Stay tuned for details in Hot Chat coming up. But first, here's a word on the big business news of the week in Top of the Inbox.
China attracted $12 billion in foreign direct investment in June, 6.9% less than a year earlier, the Ministry of Commerce announced this week. The figure took the country's first half FDI inflow to $59.1 billion, down 3% year on year. The ministry data showed investment from the debt-ridden European Union rebounded 1% in the first half from a year ago. On the other hand, rising costs and tightening land supplies in China have also shaken investors' confidence. A total of 2,444 new companies were founded with foreign capital in June, down 16.3% year on year. China will cut taxes on the profits that foreign companies take out of the country by up to 50% after rules on withholding taxes were relaxed to encourage more overseas investment. The move will also apply to dividends paid by Chinese listed companies to foreign shareholders through the Qualified Foreign Institutional Investor Scheme. In both cases, the lower tax rates will apply only to companies and shareholders based in countries that have double taxation agreements with China. Any company listed and resident in a country that has a tax treaty with China will now automatically qualify for the relief on dividends from Chinese operations or from wholly owned subsidiaries. More major cities in China saw home prices rise in June from May as the country's property sector showed signs of warming following limited government stimulus for the slowing economy. In June, 25 of 70 major cities, drastically up from 6 in May, recorded home prices higher than in the previous month. The information from the National Bureau of Statistics said that compared to May's figures of 43, only 21 cities saw drops in new home prices last month, while prices in 24 cities remained the same.
You may remember that several weeks ago we told you about how much China's local governments are in debt. Well, at least that's a number that everybody pretty much knows. But there's another number that's not as well known and that has everyone just as worried. The gap in China's pension funds. The number of China's retirees is growing quickly and everybody's scrambling to bridge the pensions gap. Shanghai is talking about something called deferred retirement, for example. How big is the pensions gap and where did it come from? What can be done about it? Let's try to figure it out on Hot Chat.
China can claim a lot of number ones. The largest country in the world, the largest economy in Asia, the world's fastest growing economy. But there's one number one position that many Chinese are not happy about: the highest social security taxes in the world. If you are an employee, you pay 8% of your salary into a government-run pension fund. Business owners pay 20% of each employee's salary into the pension funds as well. Altogether, the pension payments are almost 30% of everyone's pay.
这个是远远地超出了世界平均的水平。世界平均水平是10%，国际的紧接着20%。
现在2000多呀
，2000多
，2000，2、
3000不到的，只能吃饱吧，吃吧。
So you pay all that money and you only get enough to cover basic retirement needs. You might think that the country would have a large reserve saved up in pension funds, but the fact is, there is worry that when the time comes, there won't be enough pension money available to support you and China's ever-growing number of retirees.
这些年来，中国的政府一个非常大的成绩就是，基本上建立了一套社保体系。当然了，这套社保体系是不是能满足我们的要求还不敢说，是不是非常的完善也不敢说，但是基本上建立了。但是呢，也面临着很多的问题，比如说，一个是基本养老保险存在着比较大的一个养老金的缺口，有的说大的没谱，有的呢又说没有那么大。但不管怎么说， 确实都非常大，而且近10年来，基本养老保险的财政补贴已经超过了1万亿。
With the highest pension payments in the world and government subsidy, how can China's pension fund still be short of money? And why are those payments so high in the first place? Obvious facts, but lots of questions. Here's how it all began.
In 1997, the country launched a nationwide pension reform. Before then, the government collected money from companies and then just paid for everything for everybody. The new system had two parts, what's called a social pool, which is where the company's 20% contributions go. Provincial governments collect that money and make payments to retired people, just like the old system. The new part was the personal pension accounts, where the 8% of your salary goes, and which local governments give back to you tax-free upon retirement. And that was where the problem started. The idea was that both the central and provincial governments would fill up the personal accounts retroactively in 1997, from the time that everybody started work. But there wasn't enough money. A state council survey figured out that doing that would have required 145% of China's gross domestic product for the entire year.
为什么我们国家这个社会统筹缴费这么高？我想主要是因为我们国家没有在97年制度转轨的时候没有解决好制度转轨成本的问题。一般来说，制度转轨成本我们会应该加大国家财政的投入力度。那么我们国家想利用下一代人的缴费来解决制度转轨成本，所以社会统筹部分的缴费率高居不下。
In fact, the government did put money into the new system at the time. It just never said how much. What everybody agrees on, however, is that it was not enough, that the pension system was set up without enough money to pay the pensions. The government has admitted that some of the personal pension accounts from then on have been in effect empty. Not good news. But the overall picture is even worse than that. Remember the social pool into which your company puts 20% of your pay? Well, China's quickly aging population, combined with increasing average retirement salaries, is leading to a real emergency. The social pool is draining faster than anyone had thought possible. And to make sure current retirees received their pension, the government did what it had to do. It borrowed your money.
那么现在的问题呢？因为社会统筹账户入不敷出，所以我们就要挪用个人账户的钱。我们还是在继续做空，而且做到比较大的比例的做空。
There are reassuring statements from time to time. The Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security said that last year, the income of the pension funds was 1.3 trillion yuan, while the expenditure was only 1.2 trillion, 100 billion yuan left. True, but it all depends on how you add it up.
我们看到的数据是一个总的数据，并没有说社会统筹基金缺口有多大，个人账户缺口有多大，没有说这个数据的。但是如果把社会统筹跟个人账户一起来看的话，那么当期很多地方都是有结余的，但这个结余量非常的低。但是这个你挪用了个人账户的钱，以后还是要还的嘛。
Sorry, but it's time for some math. That 1.3 trillion yuan of revenue included a subsidy of nearly 200 billion yuan from the central government. That means the real income of the pension funds was 1.1 trillion. If you work out the percentages, that means the personal accounts should contain around 300 billion yuan. But the ministry says there is only 100 billion yuan saved there. Where did that missing 200 billion yuan go? Well, it went to the only place it could go, into the social pool to support the payments to current retirees. The government has been doing that annually. That's why the amount of money missing from the personal accounts has risen from 740 billion in 2004 to 1.7 trillion yuan by the end of 2010. Scary? But that's not even close to the end of the story. The number of people in China above 65 years of age has now reached over 100 million, 9% of the country's total population. By 2040, that proportion will hit nearly 22%. With fewer workers and more retirees, the pension hole can only get deeper and deeper.
So not surprisingly, everyone is scrambling to make up for the shortage in the pension funds. But how? The rule now is that money in the pension funds can only be invested in bank deposits or used to buy government bonds. The earnings rate there is 3% at most, however, and that cannot come close to keeping up with the pension system's growing needs. So the government is conducting a variety of experiments with other ways to boost the fund's income.
In In the best-known experiment, Guangdong province has been allowed to invest 100 billion yuan from its pension fund in capital markets in an attempt to increase the money there. Other than the amount, not much is known about the Guangdong pension investments. Officials say the money will go into both domestic and overseas bond and stock markets. Only a small unrevealed proportion is to go into the stock market. It's also not known whether the money will come from personal accounts or the general social pool. If it comes from personal accounts, will those accounts make money on the profits from the investments? And if the investments lose money, who takes the loss? No one's talking about that. Experts say this is all a good idea, but point out Guangdong is a special case because it's so wealthy.
据我了解，全国养老基金的积累一半以上在广东。这个基金呢，它用来给全国这个社保理事会来做投资，这个不具有代表性。对大多数全国其他省份来说，一般并不适用广东的经验，因为一般是没有那么多机遇的。
Indeed, 14 of China's 30 provinces had deficits in their pension funds in 2010, but on a countrywide basis, over the past 15 years, there is still a pension fund surplus, around 1.9 trillion yuan, if you add the personal accounts to the social pool. In fact, many pension experts say the central government should take over all the accounts from the provinces and administer the pension system nationally. How would that work? There are two possibilities under discussion. Number one, the government stops borrowing money from the personal accounts and uses only the funds in the personal accounts for investment. Then, if the investments make money, it goes into the individual's personal accounts, say at the end of every year. Number two, the other alternative would be for the government to leave the gaps in the personal accounts alone for now, promising to pay individuals back later. Then, the overall surplus immediately becomes available for investment. Any profits would go back to both funds, reducing their shortages. In addition to investment returns, there are voices saying the government should draw on other sources of money to help fill the gap in pension funds.
我们国家应该大力调整财政支出结构，利用国有资产变现或以国有股分红的收入来解决转轨成本。要把这个转轨成本一解决，我们国家社会统筹部分的缴费率就可以下降，那么就可以减轻企业和个人的负担。我们养老保障的第二支柱企业年金也会真正的发展起来。
The second pillar that Professor Peng favors is nothing more than pension plans run by companies themselves as a benefit to employees, as a supplement to the government plan. In many European and North American countries, company pension plans make up over 60% of the country's total pension schemes. In China, that number is less than 10%. Li Weisha is an advisor on company pension schemes, and she explains that the investment field for company plans in China is too limited for them to work well now. For the moment, pension plans can invest in only the domestic stock and bond markets.
国际的养老金的这一块发展上面，对另类投资是普遍的是加大了关注的力度，而且呢，这个比例呢也在上升。对国内来说呢，现在还不能涉及这一块的投资。 包括一些好的项目，像债权计划呀，像这个银行理财产品啊，像信托计划呀等等，这些范围呢还没有对企业年金放开。当然，企业年金的监管部门也在组织，就是业内在进行这方面的讨论。是不是能够扩开，就是年金能够以资产证券化的方式来参与实体的投资。
At the moment, a company gets an effective tax break of only 5% for establishing a retirement plan for its employees. Joyce Xu, tax partner at Deloitte Touche Tohmatsu China, joins us in the studio now to talk about that and other problems that private retirement plans have in China. As you've just heard, a very important factor in establishing private pension plans are tax incentives, and in other countries they can be up to 15%. Do you think China's is not enough?
I think this is a very good question about tax incentives and the private pension schemes. The statutory pension scheme, this has been operating for over 30 years and has been evolving. So relatively speaking, it has a longer history, whilst the pension scheme, the official guidelines and regulations were not released until 2004. So therefore, it has a relatively shorter history. I think it takes some time for companies to get used to it. But one of the issues is that conceptually, a lot of Chinese employees, particularly with today's younger generation, may prefer the immediacy of cash reward as opposed to the longer-term benefits, such as pension scheme. So conceptually, that needs some education.
Getting to sort of the technicalities of tax breaks, do you think we should have tax breaks on pension contributions themselves or on the returns on those investments, or both, or some combination?
Yeah, to tax first or to tax later is the question, and it's a billion-dollar question. I think with China's vast geographical spread and the uneven development in different regions, there are no hard and fast rules. It really is a question of overall fiscal affordability for either the regional governments or for the country as a whole, as well as raising the awareness of the benefits of doing so. And I certainly think that with the rapid growth of the Chinese economy, now there are more affluence in the society as a whole, but there's also poverty in some regions. And with the aging population, it is crucial that we do not unduly solely rely upon the basic statutory pension scheme, but build a more balanced, diversified, and multi-layered pension system. And the private pension scheme is certainly one of them, one of the options.
Thank you very much for coming on the programme.
You're welcome, David.
Feel like taking the family or perhaps your significant other to a movie? What about a movie where you could talk whenever you want, eat whatever you want, and during the show do whatever you want? Shanghai may have the answer to that in retro cinemas. Stay tuned for Lightbulb, where we'll see how some clever folks are taking us back to the future, to drive-in movies.
In order to find a bomb that will destroy Los Angeles, FBI agent Sean decides to assume the physical appearance of terrorist Castro. However, this adds unexpected complications to the case and to Sean's personal life.
Well, if you're Sean Archer, I guess I'm Castor Troy.
Directed by Zhang Wu, starring John Travolta and Nicolas Cage, Face Off screens on July 28th at 10 p.m.
Welcome back to Money Talks and to our weekly summary of top business headlines in Corporate Catch-Up. Here is Wang Lihuan, our corporate correspondent. Good evening, Wang Lihuan.
Thanks, David, and good evening, everybody. Well, the private Chinese manufacturer Sichuan Bohong Group has acquired Canadian auto parts maker Westcast Industries Incorporated at a price of around $245 million. Westcast shareholders will be entitled to receive $11 per share in cash. This is the biggest Sino-Canadian M&A deal so far in the manufacturing sector. Westcast, which counts Ford, GM, and Volkswagen as key customers, is the world's leading supplier of cast exhaust manifolds for passenger cars and light trucks. The deal took more than 9 months to come together. Bohong had been negotiating to buy the financially troubled Ontario manufacturer last year, but failed to put up a required $2 million deposit at the time. Well, this time that deposit has been paid, and Bohong will get sole ownership of the 7 factories and 1 research center belonging to Westcast. Chinese PC maker Lenovo could overtake Hewlett-Packard as the world's biggest PC maker by sales as soon as this year, making it the first Chinese company to grab the top spot globally in the technology sector. Well, the ThinkPad maker became the world's #2 PC vendor in the 3rd quarter of last year. And according to data from research firm IDC, Lenovo had a 14.9% global market share in the April to June quarter this year. That's only 0.6 percentage points away from HP's 15.5%. The rise of Lenovo has definitely been helped by its purchase of Germany's Medion and a joint venture with Japan's NEC Corporation last year. China accounts for about 42% of Lenovo's total revenue, the bulk of that coming from PC sales. However, a weak PC market outlook and competition in the tablet sector, not exactly Lenovo's strongest suit, could put pressure on the company. And speaking of tablet devices, ZTE, China's second largest telecommunications equipment maker, saw its shares drop to a 3-year low this week after the company said its half-year profits could fall as much as 80%. ZTE said net income for the first half of the year was expected to be between 154 million yuan and 308 million yuan. That is down from about 770 million yuan a year earlier. Reduced investment income, losses from foreign exchange, and a drop in domestic revenue were the reasons ZTE gave for the drop. The warning triggered a slew of brokerage downgrades, of course. Its Hong Kong-listed shares have fallen 57% since the start of this year. But ZTE is not the only one feeling the pinch of China's slowing economy. Since just last week, China Eastern Airlines, home appliance maker Suning, and electronics maker TCL have all warned that their profits will be lower than expected. And that's all for this week, David. Now back to you.
Thanks, Wang Lihuan. You've got a lot of choices for seeing a movie in China. Buying a DVD or Blu-ray disc, downloading or watching streaming videos online. If you're feeling a little old-fashioned, you could even go to the cinema. Or how about being really old-fashioned and trying a drive-in movie? If you don't remember them, your parents might. And it turns out this seemingly old-fashioned business could be taking off in China. Let's just see about that in this week's Lightbulb.
Watching a movie behind the wheel. Lovers quarreling in front of a big movie screen. And a stolen kiss in public with movie dialogue in the background. It all reminds you of 1950s America. Local viewers could be reminded of the drive-in scenes in the TV series Beijing Love Story. They were shot at the drive-in near the capital's Chaoyang Park, the first in the country. And never to be behind the times, Shanghai has now caught up, as of late last year. Fan is a manager at the drive-in cinema in Shanghai's Baoshan district, which was opened last September. It's the size of 2 football fields, and its 2 screens play movies from 8 to 12 a.m. on Thursday and Friday nights. Tickets are 120 yuan per car, and even though it's on the outskirts of town, more and more cars are turning up.
做到现在9个月是等于1个月要比1个月好的，一辆车没有也有可能。后来嘛，发展到几辆车，10几辆、20几辆、30几辆就这样。
Fan is expecting his audience numbers to grow from the current 20 to 30% attendance rate. But another drive-in cinema that opened in Pudong's Jinqiao area in May might have doused Fan's hopes. Within just 2 months, this drive-in's box office is nearly double that of the one in Baoshan.
最近的话，相对来说的话还是很不错的，基本上都维持在50-60辆以上平均。
And that's despite the fact that Ju's drive-in is still finishing facilities construction. Ju says the primary appeal for moviegoers is the good return they get for the ticket. Unlike traditional cinemas that sell 1 ticket per person per movie, drive-in cinemas charge only per car, and you can stay as long as you want. If a car stays from 7 to 12 a.m., for example, all the people in the car can enjoy all the movies that are shown within those 5 hours.
一般来看的话，都是情侣，就是2个人。一般我们这边放映的影片都是3到5场，每天晚上放的电影的话都是6到8场，3到5部电影。如果是按情侣算的话，就是每个人的话都可以看6到8场电影，跟电影院比的话就是6到8张票。如果以我们150的票价的话，这个价格就是相对来说的话就非常便宜的。
The second reason that Ju thinks drive-in cinemas appeal to an audience is the privacy that the cars provide. No need to be quiet or switch your mobile phone off. Viewers have a lot more freedom.
大家在一起，你看围坐着，我就比较开心，然后很有味道，不像那个电影院里，我不可能这样做。然后我们一边聊天一边看看电影，我觉得很自由自在的。
So drive-in movies do have their own appeal, a differentiated competition. But still, they're competing against digital cinemas that can offer 3D, IMAX, and even 4D. How can they be sure of making money?
The first business advantage of a drive-in is that it's cheap to build. Both of Shanghai's were built for just several million yuan, as opposed to at least 20 million yuan for a cinema downtown. And it's easier for the drive-ins to do mutually supporting deals with their neighbors. The drive-in at Baoshan is a part of the Motor Park, a comprehensive business zone for automobiles. 6 car brands have in the area, and they provide free movie tickets to their customers.
厂商进来以后，我们跟他们都有合同，也有一些活动的。合同里面可能也有要给他们，他们会我们买我们多少票一个月。
And so Fan is able to open his drive-in to the big brand auto clubs. It's all helping him cover his costs. Doing better, though, is Pudong's drive-in, which had 600,000 yuan in profits in the first 2 months of operation. It turns out, though, that their tickets supply only half their income.
因为我们本身就是一个大的露天场地，对吧？这个场地的话是可以提供很多种服务的，对吧？包括一些，比如说租赁给别人用一些团体活动，对吧？包括我们这里进行一些，包括我们7月22号就要跟那个浦东电视台做一个奔驰之夜活动。
And like any good business, the drive-in is spinning off other good business.
因为这段时间有非常多的人寻求加盟。
大概有多少人寻求加盟？
应该有1到20家左右。
Ju is estimating those franchise drive-ins could bring in over 30 million yuan by the end of the year.
By the end of last year, China had over 100 million automobiles. Selling each a 150 yuan ticket would make the potential drive-in cinema market value exceed 15 billion yuan. That is, if everyone who owns a car wanted to see a movie while sitting in it. How much potential does the market really have?
Drive-in cinemas became popular during the 1950s in the U.S. During their heyday, there were nearly 4,000 drive-ins in America. But today, there are fewer than 400 there, due to increasing land cost and the high cost of converting traditional cinema screens into digital facilities.
美国最早就做了这个，可能是在上世纪的30年代就开始有了汽车电影院，那么我觉得这个可能还是2种文化的一个交叉的一个产物，一个就是我们所谓的电影文化，一个就是汽车文化。那么今天因为我们都知道中国大陆这个汽车消费者越来越多了有这个汽车的家庭也很多因此就是说可能会有那么一种消费的欲望，一种新的形态。
Gu Ying is a professional film researcher who's been working and studying in the film industry for over 2 decades. He argues that drive-in cinemas in China could just work. New cinemas in China are relatively low cost because the government offers incentive policies for cinema construction. For example, people who open cinemas with digital projectors can get a 50,000 yuan government subsidy for each projector. And property prices are already easing in China, which is good news for the drive-ins too. Good does point out some problems, however.
比如讲光的一些污染对于这个荧幕来讲，它就需要比较就是我们所谓讲流明比较大一点的这样的一种投射那么还有就是它的这个影片就我们所谓讲它的这种低调的场面不能太多也就是说因为我们都知道在美国它汽车影院一般放映的影片都是一些非常亮的一些片子那么这个可能就是一些客观放映条件上面所造成的另外一个它也不可能像影院当中那么逼真的音响效果因为毕竟它还是从汽车的本身的这个音响当中传递的这个声音。
Although setting up a drive-in cinema is much more cost-effective than building a traditional cinema, Gu expects the drive-ins will have little influence on the overall cinema market.
我还更愿意把它视为是一种新的一种汽车文化的一种消费的模式还是一种年轻人比较喜欢的一种新的生活形态那么从这一点上来讲呢，它有猎奇的成分在里边，会让我们觉得可能就是说在这样一种新方式当中促使或者讲增加城市消费的某些新方向但是对于电影观众它的分流来讲，我觉得目前还不构成一个比较大的一个分流点。
So, while heading off to the drive-in could be a lot of fun, you'll want to think first about the kind of movie you'll see there. And if you're thinking about getting into the business, you could be better off first thinking about the auto market and then about the movie market. Now, have you ever thought about investing in fine Chinese porcelain? I know I have, and have been frightened away by the prices. Well, there might just be a reasonable way into the market. That is, if you're willing to forego Ming blue porcelain for something a little more proletarian. We'll tell you about it on Bling coming up after this. Welcome back to Money Talks and to On Reflection, where we bring you the best in commentary about the world's business and China's business. One of our commentators this week was getting pretty tired of comment about China from American politicians. The Economist's Lexington column is a withering attack on a culture of China bashing in the US political scene. Lexington writes, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a man in possession of a major American political party's nomination for president must be in want of a more assertive policy on China. The latest kid on the block, Mitt Romney, is no exception. His website has a section entitled Confront China Directly." Lexington points out that President Obama's rhetoric during his campaign 4 years ago was hardly less bellicose, and that campaigns on both sides have reinforced the impression among China's leaders that America is out to thwart its peaceful rise. This, Lexington suggests, is hardly the kind of message Washington should be sending to Beijing. And perhaps summing up all those problems this week is the head of the Xinhua news agency with an appeal for cooperation and policy coordination between China and the United States. Li Congjun writes in the New York Times that over the past 10 years, an expansion of credit in wealthy countries has created a production surplus in countries like China. The world these days, Li says, is more like a contracting fishbowl, where everything affects everything else. The global boom of the past 15 years cannot be reproduced, he concludes, and says the US, China and the European Union must increasingly coordinate policies to restore balance between the financial sector and the real economy and between domestic and overseas demand. Looking over the business headlines these days, I sometimes feel like I'm in a contracting fishbowl myself. Now, as a loyal viewer of Money Talks, we can pretty much presume that you're interested in China investments. But have you ever thought of China investments? The porcelain that took its name from the country is still available for sale. And while it may not quite be the art object that first comes to mind, they're still finely made and going up nicely in price. For this week's Bling, we take you to the world of porcelain, Mao porcelain.
Vases and plates like these are seen by many as the epitome of Chinese culture. Porcelain ware emerged in China over 1,000 years ago, and exquisite pieces like these have been highly valued not only in China, but also around the globe for hundreds of years. Traditional porcelain is not the only kind that's valuable, however. Liu Jianhua, a porcelain collector and trader, says now is a good time to invest in modern porcelain, especially pieces made during the rule of Chairman Mao, often referred to as Mao porcelain. They were the last batch of Chinaware still made with high-quality raw materials and traditional manual techniques. Most come from a town in Jiangxi province named Jingdezhen. For centuries, the center of China's finest porcelain works. Liu says several government-owned ceramic factories there produce the best Mao porcelain. Buyers can find their stamps on the bottom of the objects.
50年代、60年代，就是有代表性的，比如艺术市场的。艺术市场它主要是在釉上粉彩，它是追求发艺。建国市场它主要是以就是高温颜色釉来就是做一些艺术品。陶瓷研究所也是全国很权威的一个机构，但是，你像中央它要定制一些高档礼品呢。
Liu says that while traditional themes continued to be produced from the 1950s to 1970s, new styles were added to reflect the lifestyle and social values of the time.
因为清代那个皇帝他们当时做的东西都是宫廷这些就是专门制陶瓷这一块的，中规中矩的。民国的时候，因为国家动乱了，他们也没有这个心态，就做件很好的东西。 但是你要是在毛泽东时代，你就可以尽情的发挥这个艺术家的想象力啊，是吧？创造力啊。
Just like porcelain from any other period, there are both superb pieces as well as second-rate items amongst the Mao porcelain. What's worth buying? First, the experts say, is considering how the piece was made. There are 3 major steps in porcelain production: shaping, painting, and firing. How each of them is done determines the value of the result. Raw material is the first important factor. Traditionally, and even today, the kaolin clay from Jingdezhen is widely recognized as the best clay in China. Experts say porcelain made with kaolin clay has better ductility and a more even and gentle color tone. After more than 1,000 years of mining, however, the kaolin clay is close to exhausted. The last large-scale mining took place in 1975. As a result, most porcelain made between the 1950s and the 1970s was made with kaolin clay. But now it's very rare.
现在的东西呢就比较脆弱，它这个陶瓷呢，你看过去呢，白的好像样眼睛，这个眼睛看过去很不舒服。过去那种陶瓷的那个白度啊，高白釉啊，看过去就是像一块玉啊，看过去很舒服。
The painting style of Mao porcelain was a combination of East and West. The painting is realistic and full of perspective. It was a style unique to its time, and most of its masters have now passed away. Firing is the final process of making porcelain, and there are 3 ways to do it.
在50年代的时候还有收材料，因为材料它对于这个木材这一块就是浪费很大的，真是。到60年代以后，国家就是要提倡就是不能 再收材料了，那就收煤了。那么收煤这一块，首先污染太重了。现在都是国家提倡环保啊，用汽窑来烧制啊。
Which means most Mao porcelain was fired in wood and coal kilns. Wood and coal kilns need a longer time to reach a temperature of 1,200 degrees Celsius when clay turns into porcelain. They maintain a higher translucency, however, which is much appreciated in the markets. And turning to the investment side of things, the reason they recommend Mao porcelain to collectors is that their prices are relatively reasonable.
好多东西就是可能，顶尖的了，顶尖的可能就几十万了。我们来收藏的话呢，也就几千块钱到4、5万块钱，我们都能去给有机会能收到。
And another advantage of collecting Mao porcelain is there are not as many fake items in the market so far.
人家仿烧像没很大的意义啊，就是本身你就是买那个50年代60年代的好东西，是吧？也是几万块钱，那你仿制的东西你卖不到几个钱，你仿它有什么意思呢？是吧？这意义不大了。
Prices may start low, but they're not always going to stay low. The price of Mao porcelain has been rocketing since 2004. A bottle like this only cost 2,000 yuan in 2006, but now the asking price is 20,000 yuan, up 10 times in 6 years. It may not exactly be Ming Dynasty teacups, but it is a pretty good deal.
Now, before you rush out to the porcelain markets, remember that the old porcelain collector's rule is just as valid now as it has been for hundreds of years. Thin as paper, white as jade, bright as mirror, and sound as a bell. That's what the best porcelain should be, no matter when it was made. Well, that's Money Talks for this week, and we hope you enjoyed the programme. If you've got something you'd like us to look into or any comments about the show, we'd be pleased to have an email from you. The address is moneytalks@icshanghai.com. We'd be very happy to hear from you. Good night and good weekend from Money Talks.
China's economic reforms were kicked off in part by allowing citizens to buy their own apartments in either new buildings or government residences which were privatized. Each new owner contributed to a maintenance fund to keep the building looking nice. But that was more than 20 years ago. Is there enough money left in the kitty to keep Shanghai looking good? If not, who's going to pay for the facelift? Tune in to Money Talks July 28th at 9:15 p.m. to find out.